Hey folks, this is part two of the Cinema 4D tutorial in sculpting, going over the basic tools. We talked about pull and grab already. We'll just go down the list and talk about what some of the other tools do. All right, so smooth. What smooth does is kind of what it sounds like. It would take an area and begin to attempt to kind of smooth it out. So that ridge that I created when I did that last work on the eye sockets, if I wanted to kind of smooth that out, I just slightly go over the area. And again, with the smooth tool, you have controls of size and pressure as well. So that is, again, it's going to kind of attempt to make things almost like blurring them out, essentially, right? Removing the finer details and getting it to smooth out. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. So wax is kind of interesting. What wax does is it kind of, imagine taking a little bit of clay and applying it to the surface. So it's gonna, instead of like pulling out an area or inflating an area, it's gonna allow you to kind of add a little bit more material. So if we bring the pressure up, let's just say to like, I don't know, 75, and go over the brow a little bit, you can see that I can start to add in a little bit of material, kind of build it up and build it up and build it up. If I look to the side, then I'm actually applying a bit of that kind of waxy sort of material. So it's a good way to add kind of like layers and layers if you want to sort of build up in that sort of direction. So that can be a great way to start to build in. It does have a little bit of a flatten kind of effect to it, but you can certainly smooth that out as you go as well. So that is wax, kind of up again, applying different layers. I'm just going to grab this a little bit here and shorten this up. Actually, I didn't like that so much. Let's see. I'll take this whole thing and kind of bring it out and out and out here like this. Let's talk a little bit about knife for a second. Actually, I'm going to go to grab and make it really big because I want to show you what I can do here. All right, let's do this. There we go. Okay, so knife, what knife can do, there, I've made this very strange looking. Knife, what this does is it allows you to make like cuts, but not like cutting the piece off, right, or all the way through. It's sort of like, if you imagine taking a big slab of clay and taking a knife and drawing with it, that's what knife does. So for this, you want to do a little bit smaller tool. I'm going to go 15, maybe make the pressure up a little bit to like 40. And I can start to draw in here like some teeth sort of forms, right? So I would do something like this and like this, and I could even draw them connected in this sort of way to make some sort of form, right? So that a scary skull is coming together. That would be a way that you could start to manipulate that. You know, any sort of cuts that you put in the surface is going to make like again, like an indentation, right? And if you notice that your cuts are not very smooth, then you might want to look again at the subdivision as that goes in. So knife is a powerful tool to kind of give some finer details when you're starting to work into this object. Now, of course, anytime I'm using these tools, I'm kind of working back and forth, right? So after I've done the knife, I could go back in with my grab tool, maybe bring this down to like 60 and start to play with getting this to form in a little bit more sort of behind the teeth to get them to look more realistic, and then probably going back and cutting some more and kind of building it in. So this is just a process of kind of going back and forth of working with different size tools, kind of trying to get positive and negative forms shaped out, thinking about where you can have indentations and where you can have recesses, and really building in, you know, piece by piece as you go. It really is like sculpting clay in that sort of way. So there I've made this, you know, a little bit more protruding. But anyway, that's what knife does. It starts to give those dimensions. Okay, pinch is kind of what it sounds like. This flattened sort of area here, if I went over it with a pinch, it would sort of like make that more of a ridge, more of a defined ridge. You see that what's happening there? It's pinching it to kind of a center point. So going from this to this kind of form, right? So anywhere that you want to add a little bit of more detail to an area, you can do that pinch and it will make it more defined and more described in that way. Again, size and pressure is something to look for there. Flatten kind of does what it sounds like. If you like take it on an edge, it's really going to try to create a flat edge to it though, right? It's not going to necessarily smooth it down per se, but really kind of like make a flattened edge on what you're working on. So, you know, if you were to, let's just do this, grab something like small, right? Do a couple things like this, right? And then also flatten that. We go to the top of this. You should be able to make this kind of like a bit of a plateau, right? So it like stumps it, makes a stump almost, right? So that's what flatten does, kind of gives you that detail. I'm getting kind of a weird figure here, aren't I? Okay, so that is flatten. Inflate is a great tool. What Inflate does is kind of what it sounds. It takes an area and creates a circular, almost bubble-like form. So if we bring the pressure up to like 80, let's say, and maybe we even bring the size up to 45, you could take an area here and draw it, and it would make like a bubble, right? So there you go. That's what Inflate does. Kind of gives you that bubbled surface. Inflate is great as well because you can invert it. So here, if I click invert, then I can go in an area and start to go in, right? So an indentation as opposed to, notice what happened when I went too far. I've got some crazy geometry. It sort of started to go in on itself. Try to avoid that, all right? When things start to get too close to the geometry. So inflate, again, you can invert to make it positive or negative. All right, amplify. Amplify is an interesting tool. What it will do is kind of like add more contrast to an area that's rather subtle. So like, let's say these cheekbones here where it's a little bit, those ridges are coming out. If I do amplify over the top of them, notice how they're getting more pronounced. So the high areas will become higher and the low areas will become lower, and you get essentially more contrast out of them. So if I went over these weird teeth, you know, I could get them to become more defined as I go there. Okay, so that is amplify. Again, size and pressure there, certainly considerations. Fill is great. What fill does is it would, you know, definitely goes to an area and you can fill it in, right, almost to its entirety, right? So there, that nose cavity is almost gone because I filled it in. And again, size and pressure for that. We'll get back to repeat. Scrape is pretty cool because you can take an area that's raised and you can kind of scrape the surface. It's almost like flatten, but it's more like drawing. Flatten just kind of attempts to make a flat area, whereas scrape, you could kind of like get more bumpy kind of things happening. So imagine, you know, making like carving a stone, right? That's what scrape is going to be able to do for you. Give you those sort of bumpy kind of ridges and edges. So again, you know, as you get into the finishing touches and details, you want to think about how you can add some of those dimensional specific kind of qualities to it. And then last is erase. I mean, I'm going to do another tutorial after this to talk about some more function, but erase, what it would do is bring it back to kind of your original mesh, right? So if I didn't want these at all, I just go over this and erase it, and it will attempt to get it back to that normal. Of course, you've probably sculpted and moved it a whole bunch. So this is good for when you're doing some of those finer details. To sort of get it down, but erase kind of tries to attempt to get it back to your original sort of format. All right, so those are the tools that you can use to really get, you know, super detailed, interesting, unique models. I'm really interested in what you're going to be making with this, but again, most thing to remember is just to play around. You can do undo a whole bunch of times. Definitely, I would take, for me anyway, several attempts to kind of play around to see what this can do, and I might often start over and kind of go from there. I'm going to go into another video in a minute that talks a little bit about adding some finer details, but that's all for now.